The topic I want to cover today is the manual standby database. So what are we going to look at in our time together? Well, the agenda, just to make sure we all know what we're talking about, we'll begin by looking at Oracle's favored technology for fault tolerance. And that, of course, is DataGuard. And DataGuard's a fantastic product, but there are some licensing implications. Then we'll move on to what Uncle Oracle would really like you to invest in, which is active DataGuard. And that takes DataGuard to a whole new level. So these first two topics are really just to make sure we know what we're talking about. I know some of you will be using DataGuard already, so I hope put in a few questions or comments if you wish, but otherwise just bear with us while we bring everybody else up to the same page of the manual, as it were. But what if you don't have the licenses that give you DataGuard? Never mind active DataGuard. What that means is you're running on standard edition. And an awful lot of people, an awful lot of shops are using standard edition licenses. What can we do there? Well, then we come to the manual standby option, the manual standby. What we can do with that, it's pretty good. Okay, it isn't as good as DataGuard, but it can do an awful lot for you in the way of fault tolerance, minimizing downtime, minimizing data loss. And of course, we'll have demonstrations. I'll walk through the whole process of creating and using a manual standby database. Try to demystify the process a bit so that those of you on standard edition will see that it's not that difficult. As long as you have a solid understanding of the Oracle architecture, the method is pretty straightforward and rock solid, reliable. So that's my agenda for our session today. First topic, DataGuard. Now, DataGuard is part of Enterprise Edition, and it's a pretty fantastic capability. It was introduced in Release 9, so it's a rock solid technology. It's been around for a long, long time. And DataGuard, even from the very beginnings, could give you zero data loss if configured appropriately. Without DataGuard, it is possible to lose data in an Oracle environment in certain very specific events. If worst possible thing occurs, your entire server is stolen and sold on eBay or whatever, your entire database server is lost, you will lose data. Because Oracle has a critical dependency on the current online redo log files. Sure, they're multiplexed, give you fault tolerance there as well, but if you lose all your online redo log files, you are going to lose data. No matter what you've done with backups and archives, getting your backups off-site, getting your archives to a remote machine, if you lose the entire machine, you will have lost your online log files, you will lose data. DataGuard gets around that by shipping the change vectors to a remote site in, if you choose to do it, real time. So it gives you an absolute zero data loss environment. There's a cost, and here I'm not talking about financial cost, there's a cost in performance terms, because your commit processing now becomes dependent on writing change vectors to a remote site rather than writing them only to the local online log files. There are also implications for availability if you go for zero data loss. The way it's been implemented, if it becomes impossible to send the redo to the remote site, the primary database will stall, it will hang, because otherwise you might commit a transaction which hadn't been written to the remote site, and that would make you vulnerable to data loss. So you can configure zero data loss, but there are implications for performance, implications for system availability. However, DataGuard is a lot more than that. And we've done a few webinars and lectures over the years about what you can do with DataGuard. It's a lot more than just fault tolerance. I put up a couple of things here that you can do with it. It's a logical standby. And those of you considering using DataGuard, logical standby, very powerful capability indeed. It's, in effect, a copy of your database, but configured as a data warehouse. optimized for query, maybe different partitioning, different materialized views, different indexing strategies, loads of extra summary tables. So logically, it looks like your production database, but internally the structures are completely different and optimized for query processing. It's like a real-time data warehouse. That came in with 9i Release 2, solid technology. Snapshot Standby came in with Release 10, a wonderful way to get real business value for your DataGuard environment. It's not just fault tolerance. The Snapshot Standby can be used for your testing and development systems without compromising data loss. And the whole thing can be automated with the DataGuard broker. So that was just a quick couple of minutes. DataGuard itself, what you can do with it. It's a very powerful capability. Now, moving on.
Before we go on, we got a couple questions here. First question is, do you see many sites running in zero data loss mode?
To be honest, not that many. The zero data loss is possible, but it does have these issues. To be running in zero data loss mode, you need to have really strict requirements for data loss. Quite simply, if the connectivity to the remote site goes down, you will shut down your primary. The assumption is it's better to have no transactions than have the possibility of losing a transaction. So it's not widely used. But if you are a bank, for example, if I walk up to the cash machine, put in my cards, draw out $50 from the cash machine, you don't want to lose that transaction under any circumstances. It would be better to have the cash machine cease to function than take the risk of losing a transaction afterwards. So it's not widely used, but if you need it, you need it.
I got a question that came in. It said, is manual standby similar to DB visit?
Ooh, it's very similar indeed. The manual standby we were looking at, it's a long time since I looked at DB Visit, but it's a nice product, nice company. I was impressed by what they can do. And my understanding of it is it's actually very similar to manual standby. What they've done, in effect, is wrap up the manual standby in a wonderful structure for managing it. Very similar in functionality to what you get to the DataGuard broker provided with DataGuard. So, but of course, you pay for it. You have to pay DB Visits. You're not paying Oracle, but it's still an extra product you have to buy.
Yep. Another question came in. Do you need a separate license for DataGuard?
Licensing? No, it's part of Enterprise Edition. It is Enterprise Edition. Otherwise, all of this is included within it. What is not included within it is, if I can get to my next slide, Active DataGuard.
Perfect.
Okay. This is an option on top of Enterprise Edition. So your physical standby database without DataGuard is only ever going to be in mount mode. It's mounted. Its purpose is fault tolerance. We've got the variations like logical standby and snapshot standby, very powerful indeed, but your physical standby is meant for fault tolerance and nothing else. Active DataGuard allows you to open that physical standby database while redo is being applied. A fantastic capability. It means you can offload all your query processing to the physical standby. Okay, it isn't optimized for query processing the way a logical standby might be, but it does mean that you can get real business value from the thing. It's not a box that's just sitting there and you hope you'll never use it. If you open it read-only, with redo apply, it's serving two functions. It's part of your disaster recovery. You can switch over to it, possibly within seconds if anything goes wrong with your primary site, but at the same time, you can get the business value of it, of offloading your queries to it. And later releases, you can run real applications against Active DataGuard standby. You can simulate read-write capability. There's wonderful capabilities came through in later releases, release 12 and later. So it's a physical standby for fault tolerance, but it's open while also providing the disaster recovery capability. Also, release 12 introduced the fast sync capability. The fast sync capability, it's yet another type of standby, and you don't have to pay for that. You can run it on a different machine, install the Oracle Home and build it without needing to license that machine. Why would you do that? Coming back to that previous question, a fast sync standby does actually make running in zero data loss mode much more practical for many sites. The fast sync standby might be on a separate machine within the same data center, reasonably close, not the other side of the planet. So it's close enough, you don't have those problems of performance when you're sending data to it, but it's remote enough that it does protect you against loss of your physical machine. The sort of operating system problem that causes the whole machine to break down, for instance. It also is very valuable for cascading standbys, and that's where we're talking about distributed environments. You have one central database which is sending changes out to a group of other databases. Maybe you're propagating data to a data warehouse and from then on to a series of data marts, geographically distributed or distributed in different parts of your company. Very powerful capability for distributed systems. Now, imagine you are some multinational website. If I connect to your web server to query what it is you're selling, there's not much point in my query being processed by the main database the other side of the planet. It could be my query could be offloaded to a cascade standby local to me. That will give me better performance as a user, better response times, and will take the stress off your primary that's actually doing your transaction processing. Very nice capability. Also, Oracle has thrown more functionality into Active Data Guard. There was a slow take-up of Active Data Guard. It costs a bit of money and people didn't really go for it. So they keep adding more capabilities to it. And the latest one, some nice automation for damage repair. Certain problems on the primary can be fixed without any DBA intervention if you have the Active Data Guard option enabled. So it can add real business value to your Data Guard environment. Data Guard is no longer just fault tolerance. It's a lot more than that.
All right, we got a couple questions in. The first one that I'd like to start with is, does Active Data Guard license include Golden Gate?
Oh, that's a good one. It's the other way around. It's actually quite annoying. What happens is that with Golden Gate, they throw in the Active Data Guard license, but Active Data Guard does not include the Golden Gate license. So clearly Oracle is doing this to try to promote sales of Golden Gate. And that is a bit of a problem because with streams, for instance, being de-supported and removed, the only supported means of replication in the Oracle environment is now Golden Gate. So they're trying, I think, to make Golden Gate more attractive by including the Active Data Guard license within it.
Got it. What does it cost? Active Data Guard.
Oh, right. Let's have a look. If we go to... If I understood licensing and costs, I'll be a salesman and rich instead of a technician and broke. However, Enterprise Edition options. So remember, Data Guard itself is included with Enterprise Edition. A mere $47,500 per core factor. Active Data Guard, there it is, comes in at $11,500 per core factor. So for comparison, it's the same price as partitioning, same price as advanced compression, significantly less than rack. So that's going to be about a 25% uplift on your license. So it's a serious expense, but it's handleable in many cases. And since we're here, for comparison, if we look at, say, Golden Gate, which I mentioned, that'll be on data integration. Golden Gate includes Active Data Guard. Woo, 17,500. Yeah, so they're charging you for that. But that is the only real option for automated replication in the current releases.
And then the last one I have here is, can you use cascading standbys without Active Data Guard?
You can, but you're going to have to do quite a lot of the work manually. Active Data Guard uses fast sync for cascading standbys, but fast sync you don't get unless you've licensed Active Data Guard. So you have to do a lot of work manually to configure your cascading standbys. It also doesn't work in real time. There will be delays built into the system if you don't have active data guard. But cascading standbys in release 12 are now fully supported. In earlier releases, it was a horrible amount of manual configuration, and you got the feeling that Oracle really didn't want you to do it. But now it's fully supported with or without active data guard, but active data guard will make it a whole lot easier.
Awesome. I have one more question actually that came in, if that's okay. It says, does standby database need a separate license if it is not active? I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It makes perfect sense to me. And what do you think the answer might be, given that we're talking about Oracle software? Of course it needs a license. Of course it needs a license. You have to license every machine where there is any sort of Oracle instance. And a data guard instance, no matter what sort it is an instance that's running. It's the same thing with manual standby. With the manual standby, you'll have to license, obviously, the machine where the primary database is running with standard edition SE2, and the remote machine where your manual standby is would also have to be licensed.
That's it for me.
Okay. Thank you for those. So that was positioning, in a sense, positioning the product, what we would have in an ideal world. What we are talking about now, though, is what you can do without it, what you can do with standard edition. And that's the manual standby. It's rock solid technology. It's been around for years. I first configured this sort of thing back in release 7, release 8, a long time ago. The general concept is pretty straightforward. You back up your database, you restore it somewhere else, and on your primary database where you're doing all the transactions, you're generating redo, you're generating archive log files. As you generate the archive log files, you copy them to the remote machine where you restored the backup of the database, and there you apply them. So your manual standby is being rolled forward with all changes applied to the primary database, but it is not happening in real time. With data guard, it will be happening in real time. With manual standby, it's only happening on log switch. So potentially, you can lose data. You could lose, theoretically, all the data since your last log switch, since the last log switch. And that begs the question, how much data is that going to be? Well, it could be just a few minutes. It might be no data loss at all. But depending on the frequency of your log switching, you can lose data. And if you're in a zero data loss environment, clearly this is not a solution for you. But in many, many environments, a small amount of data loss may be acceptable. And if there's no data loss, fine. And very often there won't be. It will also minimize the downtime. It's typically going to be far quicker to copy your last archive logs over to the standby site and apply them and open that than it would be to do a restore and recover exercise at the primary site. That might be hours of downtime. So you can lose data, probably not much. And also it will help you with minimizing downtime. The bad news, there's no automation. With DataGuard, Oracle facilities take care of transmitting the redo, of propagating, capturing the redo at the primary site, propagating it to the remote site and applying it. Oracle facilities handle all of that. Anything like switchover or failover, Oracle can automate all of those capabilities. With manual standby, you've got to do it. You need to work out how to propagate the archive log files to the standby site and how to apply them. Within our skill builders, our production systems, we're usually using standard edition. We do copying the log files to the standby site. I don't actually copy them, I use NFS. I just configure on the primary another log archive destination, which is in fact an NFS mount from the machine where the standby is. So to copy the archive log files, I'm just using NFS to do it. That might not work if your standby with the other side of the planet, but there are many other techniques that would do. Unix, Linux, rsync might work quite nicely, for instance. Many ways to do that. The apply of the archive logs, that's basically just a recover command. So if you're stuck back in the 20th century, you could use SQL Plus and use a recover database command. Nowadays, of course, one would do it with RMAN. So the apply then, you need to launch the process that will apply the archive logs, but that can all be scripted, and so it should be. You get some sort of capabilities that let you get a business value out of it. You can open it read-only at any time. And depending on how you're configuring the copying of the archive log files, you're not making yourself vulnerable to data loss. You should still be copying the archive log files to the standby site. It's just that when it's open read-only, you won't be applying them. So that wouldn't compromise data loss, but it would compromise maybe downtime in the event of the need to fail over, because you'd have a backlog of archive logs to be applied. So that's what it can do. It's good, reliable technology, minimal data loss, can give you some benefits to reduce downtime, can be used as a query system with some limitations. So it's probably time,
So for questions, well, first one, is this supported by Oracle?
It's fully supported. It's fully supported. Oracle won't support you in the sense of providing routines. To automate the process, you'll have to write your own scripts. But it is a fully supported solution. There's no problem with that at all. And I'm going to configure it using standard Oracle tools, using RMAN for the most part.
The next question that I have is, can you open the standby read-write and then use flashback to make it a standby again?
Ooh, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? Unfortunately not. What that is actually describing is the snapshot standby. That's the technology used by Snapshot Standby Database. Good question, that one. The way Snapshot Standby works, you take your physical standby, open the read-write, do whatever you like to it for test and developments, and then you flash it back to when it was a physical standby again, and then apply all the accumulated redo. But the trouble is the flashback technique is, guess what? Enterprise Edition. Nice try.
So I have a couple other questions that came in. It says, if I have 5 standby, do I have to pay 5 times?
If there are 5 separate machines, yes. However, there's no reason why you can't run standbys on the same machine as the primary. Obviously, it doesn't protect you against catastrophic failure of that one physical machine. But many of us nowadays, how often do physical machines fail? Pretty rarely. And the way disk systems work nowadays, it should be impossible to have a disk failure nowadays. And using virtualization, for instance, you will have licensed your physical server. And on that, you might well have many, many virtual machines. Well, the licensing of the physical server means all the virtual machines are licensed. So one way or another, each machine where you run a standby must be licensed. But if you're running the standby on the same physical machine as the primary, it's already licensed.
Awesome. Another question came in. It says, does this method comply to Oracle licensing? Does it need additional licensing to use this?
I think we've probably covered that, haven't we? No, there's no additional license. It is just normal standard edition. It's just that each machine has to be licensed.
All right, and I got one more that's a little more technical, so you can take this as you may. Can we not use log active dest _2 location equal service for sending the archive logs, or this can be done only with DataGuard license? I don't know if that.
Only with DataGuard.
Okay.
Only with DataGuard. Those extra parameters for that parameter is how you automate the transmission of redo, and that requires Enterprise Edition.
Sweet.
Thank you for those. Okay. Well, those of you who spent any time with me will know that I like nothing better than trying to do ad hoc demonstrations and falling flat on my face when they all go pear-shaped. So let's go for it, and let's build a physical standby. One thing, by the way, I'm going to do all this under Windows, and that is by popular demand. Apparently our demonstrations and tutorials and courses apparently were a bit Unixy sometimes. So I want to show we can do this under Windows as well. So we have to build the standby instance in memory. There's some network configuration. We create the standby database. Remember, as ever, you've got the Oracle instance, you've got the Oracle database. 2 totally separate things, but connected together. Then we'll go through the log switch and archive process that will propagate the redo from the primary to the standby. Log switch will generate the archive logs, which we then have to propagate to the standby, and then we have to apply them. So those are our 6 steps. What I've got here, I'm going to do it all on one machine, by the way, rather than 2 machines, but conceptually it's the same thing. So my primary database is going to be this one. So parameter name. Database called ORCLZ, sorry, ORCLZ, and instance is also ORCLZ. That's going to be my primary database. And if we look at it, if we look at, say, database role and open mode from the database, of course, it's an absolute normal database, open read write. Now, I need to build my standby database instance. So, what's an instance? An instance is really nothing more. Oh, I should say one more thing. Just check that I am in archive log mode. Archive log list. Yes, I'm in archive log mode. Right, one destination, which is my fast recovery area. Now, to build my standby instance, what do we need to build an instance? We need a parameter file. Easiest way to create a parameter file, I'll generate one on the primary and copy it over. Right. So I shall copy my parameter file, or simulate copying my parameter file to the standby machine. Copy Oracle Home Database init orclz.aura to init sby.aura. The sby is going to be the name of my standby instance. Copy the parameter file across. In the real world, of course, that will be probably using SCP to get it to a remote machine. I'm just doing it all within the one machine. The other file needed, for instance, is a password file. And for that, I'm just again going to copy the password file for the primary into the password file for the standby. I'll need to do a couple of edits. So I shall just notepad my standby file, that standby parameter file, and see what needs to be changed on it. Or if the fonts I'm using are no good, Tyson, do say so and I'll change them.
So I'd say they're a little bit small. If the font could be a little bit bigger, I'd appreciate it.
Let's push it up a bit more then. I'll raise that to say. Is that better?
Yes, I like that much better. Thank you.
Okay, let's push that up a bit. Take that up a step further too. Okay, now to edit this parameter file init SBY to make it suitable for the standby database, I'll get rid of this junk at the top. What else am I going to have to change? Control files. If the standby were going to be on a different machine, I wouldn't have to edit this parameter. But because I'm creating it on the same machine, well, I don't want to trample all over the control files of the primary. So I'll just rename the control files, put them in a different directory. The DB name, ORCLZ, that, most importantly, I do not want to change because the standby always has the same database name as the primary. So how does Oracle tell them apart? We add the parameter DB unique name, and that will be SBY. Right. So my primary is database name ORCLZ, DB unique name ORCLZ, instance name ORCLZ. My standby basically the same, except for the different unique name, and it'll pick up a different instance name as well, just from the Oracle seed environment variable. That should be all I need to change. So I've just given different names to the control file, specified a unique name. But of course, you can change as much as you want at this point. Now, because I'm working under Windows, there's an extra step you wouldn't have under Unix. I need to create the Windows service under which the instance is going to run. So auradim -new sid sby. Right. And that's created not the Oracle instance, it's created the instance of the Windows service. So to complete the creation of the instance, I'll set my environment variable to SPY, SQL plus / assistdba, correct the spelling, create my SP file, and then see how many spelling mistakes I made when I attempt to start up no rounds. So at this stage, my standby instance should be starting its background processes, building in memory, assuming I didn't make any critical errors when I was manually editing my parameter file. Now, it has to be no mount, because at this stage, I can't mount it because there's no control file to mount. So no mount is as far as we can go at this point. So that's starting the instance in the fullness of time. That is starting the instance. Oh, there we go. So instance built in memory and show parameter name. There it is. Database name is the same. Unique name and instance name are different. Right. Next step, configure SQLnet. We have to configure things so that I'll be able to contact both instances. So initially, let me get out of that. I'll just need to edit my listener.aura file. If we look at my listener at the moment, lsnrctl status, you see my primary is there, ready to go. My standby is all horribly blocked because, of course, it isn't even mounted. So I just need to correct that by adding it to the SID list for the listener. So my SID list, just put in another entry there. Entry there for the new SID, and F6. Restart it, lsnrctl or reload, and we should now see that, there we are, SPY is now registered properly in blocked mode, of course, but it is there, registered permanently. I'll need a TNS names entry as well, just so I can talk to it. My TNS names file, there's my ORCLZ entry. I'll just copy that and call that SPY. We'll connect to SPY. And save, get out. Okay, do they work? Well, TNS ping SPY. Looks okay. And of course, ORCLZ. Good. So that's got SQLnet configured. Then to create the standby. Okay, I'm going to do it with RMAN. I think you would need a very good reason to do it any other way. So RMAN, target. The target will be the database I'm going to back up, which will be the primary. So sys/oracle at ORCLZ. So connect to the primary database, as the database is going to be backed up. And then, if any of you are not familiar with RMAN, well, we can possibly go through this in greater detail, but an auxiliary database, in RMAN terms, is a database you are going to create. sys/oracle at SPY. So I'm connecting concurrently to the primary database and to the standby that doesn't yet exist. It's only an instance, nothing more than that at this point. All appropriate blocking things. Okay, just try again to make sure that I got my listener.aura correct. Oh, I missed out brackets. There we go. That's better. And reload the listener again. rctl reload status. Oh, that's better. I was wondering why it was only showing blocks not unknown. I thought I must have made a mistake earlier. Okay, let's try again. Move that. That's more like it. I always think this looks a bit odd at this point when it says I'm connected to RCLZ twice. The reason is what it's showing me is not the DB unique name, it's showing me the actual database name. So that is the primary. That is the as yet non-existent standby, but the standby will have the same name, and that our man is aware of. So to create the database, we use a duplicate command. So duplicate target database, the target being ORCLZ, the primary, for standby from active database using backup set. There are any number of options for doing this. Whether you would use this exact syntax in the real world is open to debate. But for a little demonstration now, this is going to work well enough. If your database happens to be 20 terabytes big and standby is the other side of the planet, you won't be doing it with a duplication from active database. But there are many variations at this point. So let's see if that is prepared to proceed. Okay, now this does take, last time I ran this, it took, I think, about 4 minutes to do it. So what I'm going to do at this stage is ask if Tyson can maybe speak to the next slide, just for a couple of minutes, while I get my throat back together.
Firstly, it helps if I unmute myself. So Skill Builders, we provide all sorts of hosting services and educational services that I think are extremely helpful. John Watson obviously heads up our database services and a lot of our database classes. One thing that I think is of extreme value is the fact that you could have John mentor your team. You could have him as someone that you can bounce ideas off of. And here's the thing that I think is really important that a lot of individuals get wrong. Is they wait for their system to start failing, or they wait for issues to start to arise before they reach out to consult an expert to make sure that they're headed down the right path. John could be that expert. One thing that is also important is that while John is extremely helpful on the Oracle database side of things, I can be extremely helpful on your Apex side of things. So if you need help designing an entity relationship diagram to support a database, some solution in your database, I would love to help you. Or if you have an application that's maybe sluggish and taken a long time to respond, well, we can help tune that and make sure that things are working correctly for you. So if you don't necessarily need help on the database side, you could totally get some help from me on the Apex side. John, it looks like things have maybe completed successfully on your end.
Thank you for that. What Tyson didn't mention is he does a lot of mentoring as well. So you can develop your applications with him, and that can be very valuable too. Okay, this is still chugging its way through. The restore does take a while, but it shouldn't be too much long. It should be finished fairly soon. So it was about 4 minutes the last time I benchmarked this, so we should be through fairly soon. So where we are now, creating the database. Looking at the output of an RMAN duplicate command, I find it really instructive. I'm a very dweeby sort of person, and I really enjoy looking at this sort of thing. And you can do a lot of reverse engineering. In the output of an RMAN duplicate, there are an awful lot of commands that aren't documented at all. You can learn a lot from studying these things. That's nearly there now. I think it's done the big files. Just doing my users table space data file at the moment. Restores complete, so it does log switch, updates the control file to standby with the new file names. Note I'm using Oracle managed files here to generate my file names, as I think everybody should. And there we go. My standby has been created. And if we look at it here, I'll log onto it like so, and select name, DB ID, DB unique name, open mode, and database role from $v database. Oops. There we see my standby. If I run the same query on the primary, because I connected to the primary as the target here, we see ORCLZ, same name, same DB ID, but the unique name is different, and of course is open read write because it's rolled as the primary database. So I've created the standby, but it's now getting out of date. So the next step, we have to do the recovery. So time goes by perhaps, maybe we have a log switch, alter system, switch, log file. Maybe we have another log switch. Oops, can't do that in RMAN. I'll actually do this in SQL Plus, it is a bit easier. Right. And do another log switch. A bit more time goes by. So my standby is now somewhat out of date. Now, if we look at the archives known to the primary, select name from v.archive log. And we've got up to log switch sequence 79. Select star from v.log. So v.log, our current group is group 80. The last archived one was log switch sequence 79. If I run the same query on the standby, oops, not that query, that query on the standby, we don't see anything at all. It's not aware of what's going on at this point. And that's because it's only in mount mode. What I'm now going to do is tell the standby about the archive logs. So let us imagine that these archive logs have now been copied over to the standby machine. Of course, they're actually on the machine already because I'm doing it all in one node. But what I shall do is do it with RMAN, because that is how any sensible person, I think, would. Log on with RMAN. And I'll use the catalog command. The catalog command. So, oops, right, copy and paste. So catalog start with pointing it towards the area where the archive logs are. In my case, just the fast recovery area. I know exactly where they are. But in a more realistic environment, there we go. So we're now reading all the details of those archive logs into the standby. What do I do next? I issue a recovery. And there we are. We've applied up to and including 79. And that's what you automate with scripts. We have another log switch, alter system, switch log file. On the primary, another log switch occurs. On the standby, we catalog it. It's brought it in. 80 has now been catalogued. And we apply it. And that's applied sequence number 80. So it's that simple. All you need to do is automate the transfer of the archive logs and the launch of the two commands, which are catalog and recover. Now, that we've covered. Final touches.
I have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
Have we got time? Yes, we have.
All right, so we actually got a fair amount of questions actually came in, and I don't know if well, let's just ask them. If standby is on a different server, is it better to transfer the RMAN backups to the local machine or for the startup? Does that make sense to you?
That would speed things up a lot. And I didn't transfer backups at all. I did a duplication from active database. If it's a big database, it really is a separate machine, you would probably want to transfer the RMAN backup sets. The ideal situation would be to be backing up to a network attached device. Then your primary would back up to that network attached device. Your standby would restore from that network attached device. And that would be very similar to what I've demonstrated. But yes, you're going to want to copy them. You wouldn't do it the way I did if it were a large database.
Perfect. The next question is, would this work in standard edition?
That's what we're talking about.
All right.
That's what we're talking about.
And the other one is, I think we're good there. And the last question I have is, is there any downtime on primary while creating your standby?
Absolutely none. Now, what I did would have worked. I didn't demonstrate it, in fact, but the method I followed, the primary would have been open read-write throughout the whole operation. The only issue might have been because of the way I created the standby using a duplicate from active database. I guess users might have noticed a slight performance degradation during that duplication. But as that previous questioner said, if you actually copied backup sets across, you wouldn't even get that effect at all. So the primary, no effect whatsoever during this process. Okay, to finish off then, obviously you need scripts to automate all this. And we have such scripts which we use all the time on our internal systems, our standard edition databases, and of course we would make them available to you if we were to assist with helping such a thing at your site. Minimizing data loss. There's a very useful parameter, show parameter lag. Archive lag target. Default of 0. So how often do you log switch? I don't know. It depends on your environment. Of course it does. And I was forcing log switches manually, but normally you'll only get a log switch when you've generated a certain amount of redo. And how frequently you log switch is dependent on how much redo you're generating and the size of your online log files. I'm sure we're all familiar with that concept. That could cause bad problems in this environment because perhaps at peak, maybe your databases are pretty busy in the daytime, pretty idle at night. That might well mean that in the daytime you're log switching every 10 minutes, and at night you're log switching every 3 hours. That would mean that your potential for data loss would vary between 10 minutes and 3 hours. That would be ludicrous. So what we would do is alter system set, the archive lag target. And if I set that to, say, 180, right, the units are seconds. That's going to force a log switch every 3 minutes. So every 3 minutes, whether there is DML going on or not, I will get a log switch. The log switch will force an archive. My scripts, or whatever mechanism I'm using, will pick up the fact that archive has occurred, transfer it to the standby, and apply it. And that reduces my maximum exposure to data loss to just 180 seconds. And that will be absolutely predictable. It might be less, but that will be the worst case. So force log switches if you don't think you're getting them frequently enough. I'll just put that back to 0 for now. My PC will be getting a bit too many log files. So you can open your standby read-only at any stage. So for example, here I am on my primary. If I select star from got.emp, stretch that out a bit. There's my normal emp table. If I update emp, set sal equal sal plus 1, where ename equals Miller. So give Mr. Miller a pay rise. Oops, Scott.emp would be better. and commit. So we've now got on my primary, I've boosted his salary by a rather pathetic amount. What can I do in the standby? Well, I could, at any stage, I can open it read-only. So alter database, open, read only. In the meantime, I'll just force another log switch here. Alter system switch log file. Well, in the fullness of time, it should open read-only. And when it's open read-only, there's no reason why your scripts can't keep running to copy the archive logs across. The reason for opening read-only, it could be to offload query processing, or it could simply be to check that things really are working. And here we should see that if I select star from scott.emp, because that DML I did here will have been in the last archive log, which I haven't yet applied. So what we see here is that Mr. Miller is still on a salary of 1,300. Okay, terminate the instance. Oh, if I try to do DML, by the way, delete from scott.emp, of course I can't. Right. Meltdown abort. I'll just terminate. So it's been open read-only, terminate it, and then I'll apply that last bit of redo, and we should see the change coming through. So at any stage, temporarily open it read-only. But to apply the redo, bring it up in mount mode. Now, the concept of failover. You could switch over. If it's an orderly switchover, you can do it. Yeah, that will work. But failover, of course, is the more dramatic thing. Something you've lost access to your data center, for instance. Some snowstorms have hit Texas, your data center's gone down. In that case, you'll need to fail over to the standby, which is the other side of the country. And in that case, you just open it read-write. Open read-write. It will become a primary database automatically. And at that point, you would have to rebuild the original primary. So, just while it's restarting, to summarize what we've got here then, the manual standby near zero data loss. In many cases, it will be zero. Often, when you have to do a failover, it isn't because the database has been damaged. Nowadays, in the 21st century, it's more likely you've lost network connectivity, perhaps, or there's been a power failure. It's unlikely to be damaged to the actual database. And in that case, your failover will be zero data loss. You won't have actually lost any redo. You'll be able to transfer that last archive log one way or another. Let me just do the catalog and recover, and then we should see that my change vector, we've got 2 log files to be applied. Apply them. And now let's then see, oops, have to alter it open, of course, alter database open, read only. You don't, in fact, have to specify read only. The current release is intelligent enough to realize that it's a standby database, so it cannot be opened read-write. But just to make the command self-documenting, I do like to revert to the older syntax at that point. And when it opens read-only, we should then see the last bit of DML has come across. So near zero data loss, in many cases it will be zero data loss. No license requirement at all, just the normal license per machine. And what I do like about it is reliable, well-tried technology. We had that question earlier about DB Visit. Now, they have wrapped up this whole thing in a very powerful model for providing the automation and minimizing the data loss. So it really does work. And if this opens, we should then finally see my changed row will have come across. And if we now look at scott.emp, there we see Miller has got the pay rise. Okay, back to you to wrap up, Tyson.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone. Do you have time for a couple more questions, or do you think we're probably done?
Let's try. If there's one or two, let's try it.
All right.
I may have to say we'll deal with them offline. Let's see.
Yep. Shouldn't we use start non-mount followed by alter database mount standby database and recover standby database instead of recover database? Did that?
You don't actually have to. That's syntax from earlier releases. The current and recent releases are intelligent enough to realize that it is a standby. So adding that syntax, and I said earlier, I actually quite like using the fuller syntax just to make commands self-documenting. That is in fact redundant. It would have opened read-only. And the same thing with those commands you mentioned there. They're referring to the standby database. It's intelligent enough to know later releases can inspect the control file, realize it's a standby, so you don't actually need to specify it.
All right. Well, with that said, we're coming up to the end of the hour. So thank you, everyone, so much for attending this webinar. There are still a couple questions in the queue, but we'll go ahead and take care of those offline. This has been a presentation by John Watson, our Oracle Certified Master, and your questions have been monitored by myself, Tyson Juglé. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Please stay safe and healthy out there, and we'll see you around.